So it isn't just for kids who have severe issues. But we're going to watch that. We're going to see how well that time is used, and there was a lot of discussion about whether this was the best use of time, how we would use it, what would happen. But as far as getting to kids and having teacher-student interactions over problems before they become big problems, it's holding a lot of promise for us at this point.
It's a very good question that you bring up. We actually have enrichment available for this during this focused learning, and students are actually able to sign up for that, or students can tag them for the enrichment. So we are meeting a variety of student needs during that focused learning time.
Hi, I'm Michelle DeWitt, former board member from the Ellsworth, City of Ellsworth. And I think it's important, there is a question in here, but I think it's important to really understand how this SIG grant works, the School Improvement Grant. The listings on educational programming and all of these programs that are happening at the high school, you know, the peer-to-peer and the project-based learning, those are all written into a grant that is paid for through SIG grant. So my question to the board is, how much of SIG grant money is funding your program at this time? And if we didn't have the SIG grant money, how many of these programs would be able to be in effect right now?
Hi, Michelle. I can't see you, so I don't know where you are. There you are. I can talk back to you. Well, not talk back to you in a sassy way, but try to answer your questions. I don't have exact numbers on the SIG grant. I'd be happy to get those to you. I just didn't bring that much data with me. But one thing we have worked really hard to do is to try to implement programs that are sustainable after the SIG grant works out. The alternative ed program, for example, was done locally. It was written into the grant, but not the funding. We knew we needed to do it, and we did it locally. I think that's part of why you're seeing things like the focused learning take place during the day. One thing that we found is that after-school programming is great, but every time we have grant funding for that, it runs out. And then when you no longer have the grant, you don't have the capacity to help the students. And at the high school level, that's particularly problematic because high school kids have other things going on after schools. Many of them work, or they have extracurricular activities. If they don't have a vehicle, then they don't have transportation home to a neighboring community. So I think the focused learning, doing that during the day, is helpful. So with all of the things that they're adding, they're trying to be mindful of sustainability. There are things that we won't be able to sustain after the grant. We have been very fortunate to do training and have some trainers in and do travel with some of the best professionals in the country. That type of thing we didn't do before we had, you know, a $1.7 million grant, and we wouldn't be able to sustain that afterwards. I think there are definitely things like that.
Maureen Junta. I taught at Ellsworth High School from September of 1974 to June of 2007. I have a question for the board, and it relates to the mailing I received as well as the presentations that I have heard. I would like to know, is it your expectation that these initiatives, the alignments, and the collaborations, and many other achievements that you mentioned this afternoon, and are they a result of Ellsworth's involvement in the RSU? And would they have occurred if Ellsworth had not been involved in the RSU? And I may have a follow-up question.
Well, I'll start off. If Ellsworth hadn't been here, as I said before, we got it shoved down our throat, so we would have gone, whoever ended up being in the RSU or whatever it was called, we know that we have to provide a good education for our students. And I can't say that if Ellsworth wasn't here, it wouldn't have happened, or it would have happened. I can't say either way. I know that we are working to provide an education as a board for all students within the RSU. It's not just Ellsworth, it's not just Steuben, it's not Sullivan, it's every student in the RSU. We're not trying to exclude or rise anybody above any other school. I'm not on the ed programming committee. Janet Wilpan is the chair, maybe she can speak more to that.
All the programming that was discussed tonight, a lot of new initiatives have been since RSU has come together. So whether that's would have happened with or with Ellsworth, I think it would have, and hopefully Ellsworth is benefiting from all those initiatives. So I'm not sure what else.
Is the implication that these collaborations, achievements, successes, curriculum alignment, best practices did not occur until we became part of the RSU?
Oh, I would, that's not what's being said. Everything, you're always trying to improve what you do, and that's all we're working towards.
Why is it on the pamphlet?
What is the purpose
Yeah.
of the mailing which I received?
I'm Henry Jr. from Steuben. I think I can answer your first question. I can't talk about the mailing because I wasn't part of it. Many of you may know I used to be a teacher at Sumner before I left almost 3 years ago to do something totally different. And I taught at Sumner for 13 or so years. So I was part of the Flanders Bay CSD, and I was part of the process of becoming the RSU and worked within the RSU for however many years, about 2.5 years. Before, when we were all our individual districts, as a science teacher at Sumner, I had 2 or 3 colleagues in my building I could talk about education with. Once a year, I got to meet the other science teachers in the Union 96. Once every 5 years, I got to we were able to get together professionally and talk with the teachers in Union 93 and NDI and Ellsworth and some other things here on the deep workshop days, which were great. But it was like every 5 years. After the RSU formed, and I think in many ways this is a very sort of quiet benefit that most people don't see, but as somebody, at least who used to be, in the classrooms teaching, I found it being very helpful to be able to actually meet and start working with my peers at Ellsworth High School, at the other elementary schools that feed into Sumner and feed into Ellsworth. And that those meetings and those workshops and professional days that we had, whether they were a course that was set up to learn about a particular thing, or whether they were a conversation among science teachers or English teachers or math teachers about best practices, about how they're dealing with these different issues with the changes in the Maine learning results and the parameters for essential instruction and now the Common Core. Those type of things only occurred because we were able to join together the 12 towns, the 3 districts, however you want to put it, to make that happen. And many of the improvements that we are seeing in these buildings has been helped by that collaboration amongst the staff. And the staff, I'm talking about teachers because that's who I hang out with, but I know the ed techs were getting together, different people, the cooks were getting together, and custodial staff and whatnot were getting together. So they were all being able to learn from each other. Now, if Ellsworth chooses to leave or Hancock and Lemoyne choose to leave, I'm not saying that's all going to suddenly stop because relationships have built, friendships have been created. But it will become more difficult over time, just like it was difficult. It took us like every 5 years we could finally get one day where all the educators in this part of Maine could get together and talk about their job and how they can help each other become better at what we do and help our kids. So it will, if the towns leave, it will disrupt that professional development piece. Now, should that make the decision about whether we should stay or go? No, it's just it's part of it. But it's an important part, and I think I hopefully try to answer that part of your question. Thank you.
I think my 2 minutes are well.
Sir, I'd like to have people that haven't asked a question first.
Oh, sure. Good evening. My name is Todd Little-Seabold. I have 2 kids here in the elementary school. I'm a professor, and I teach students often how to use data in honest ways that represent information clearly. I want to commend you all. I think that the flyer that you sent out was a good representation of your view of the benefits of the RSU. I've heard it from different people in different ways at different times, and I want to thank the RSU board. I know you all are committed to the education of the kids in this district. But when I read this information and when I see the presentation, I think there's a disconnect between the board and many parents, and perhaps, I don't know how many teachers here in Ellsworth. Because, for example, when I look at the data from the state of Maine, from the NCLB data, I see data that shows Ellsworth not really progressing particularly well in the last several years, where the state goal is 78% of kids reading at level or above level. Our scores, as Susan said, is 43 according to the state. In mathematics, the state goal is 66. Our performance is 44. What I haven't heard tonight is a legitimate reflection of you all's understanding of why a community would be concerned about the RSU. One question that I have, and it's a very specific question, is what you believe the level of community engagement has been since the creation of the RSU. My impression is, and my personal experience is, that there has been a somewhat impersonal and very difficult to engage with process. And let me give you one example that may be anomalous, but I think speaks to the challenges of a larger district. Some parents tried to organize here to do some school garden things. They came to the RSU and were told they could not do it here because it could not be done throughout the district. This seems to me like you in that particular case, frustrated a series of engaged parents who were trying to improve the educational experience of their kids because perhaps there was not a similar opportunity across the board. I was horrified when I heard that. That kind of experience persuades people that local control and the ability to go directly to a school board elected by the people of this community would give us more influence and more control. I hate to say it, but none of the conversation, none of the discussion tonight has persuaded me that the concerns about local engagement and local control are being addressed. I know that you all are in a similar position in several of the other communities. But I think the legitimate desire of communities to be deeply engaged in the education, in the direction of their schools, not just by voting on a budget.
Sir, is there a question in this? Because this is not the public comment section. This is the question regarding our presentation.
He asked you a question.
Yes.
Yes, you did ask me.
Well, he's continued on. He's continued on.
I think this would be a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I was actually going to ask you, and I will ask you the direct question. Isn't it disingenuous to represent the per student cost of Ellsworth as being lower, when in fact the student cost here has been lower since before the RSU, and will continue to be lower because it's the largest unit and the most efficient unit in the RSU? And I was wondering if there are other things that you think are not an accurate representation.
I would love to hear more about the garden project, mainly because what you've said this evening does, I have no idea who would have said you couldn't do that, and I'd like to hear more about that, because what actually happened is at Ellsworth High School, we had a teacher who wanted to start a student garden and came to the board and got a grant and has started a garden. We likewise have a greenhouse project that's grant directed at Sumner Memorial High School, and out at Ella Lewis there's a project. And I cannot imagine anyone saying that you could not plant a garden or have a project like that. And certainly it's not because it can't happen elsewhere in the RSU, because it actually happened at Ellsworth High School in the last year and a half. So I would like to know who actually told you that it was because it couldn't happen elsewhere in the district, because that really is an inaccurate statement.
Can I address that a little bit? Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Should know it. We have a garden here at school. The person who made the high school program so good was the one who started the garden here. She went to the high school. I was kind of fell in hard time, so to speak, because there wasn't anybody to pick that up. Faculty didn't really want to take on one more thing. Can't say blame them. Right now, we do have a very great group of parents at our PTF meetings, and the garden is one of the projects I think you know who's helping out a lot on that. Doing a very nice job. In fact, there's garden plots staked out between the two wings out back right now. So the garden's alive and well. I don't know where it would have been said that we can't have a garden or we're not allowed to or anything like that. I just think there was a lack of interest, and now that seems to be resurgent, which I'm excited about. Look for pink tulips in May. They're coming.
I'd like to hear an answer to that question that you actually asked Todd about the per student cost and how that's been touted as one of the big, reasons why Ellsworth should be happy with the RSU is that our per student cost is lower. But that's just a matter of we're a bigger town. We always have been.
And so, my name's David Bertram, I'm the business manager, and the gentleman is somewhat correct because this is a graph that came off data that I supplied the superintendent from a spreadsheet, and my spreadsheet says per student operating appropriation, and so what the data depicts is the combined state and local appropriation divided by number of students. It's not the expense per student. And so I apologize that I did not catch the mislabeling when the data got converted to a graph.
So that's misleading.
Mark Rosborough, resident of Ellsworth. Did you know Ellsworth is looking to get out of the RSU? We were asked by the voters to negotiate with the board to develop a contract that the Department of Education would accept. That contract is now, on November 5th, going to the voters as an up or down vote. The three premises that we started on were taxation, local control, and quality education. I've heard so many times that what we're looking to do is reduce the taxation. As Mrs. Lucas has said within our group, that's very difficult to do because the state sets the mill rate. They also set the evaluation of the property in Ellsworth, and those are the taxes that we must raise in order to get our subsidies. So in the process of doing that, I took the figures from our taxes that were raised in 2009, the year prior to going into the RSU, brought those forward. The same method that Mrs. Lucas has prepared in stating that there's been a $9.5 million savings in the RSU. From the standpoint of Ellsworth, using that same type of calculation, I come up with a $6.8 million that we have spent in addition to what we spent in '09. That is the increase in the tax and also the reserve account that we had to turn over to the RSU when we went in of $1.4 million, roughly. So now if you folks have, and I'm not questioning your math, but if you save $9.5 million and it's cost Ellsworth 6.8, where has that $6.8 million gone? So, and it's not the taxation, because that's pretty evident. But as you go through now, I'm taking it to the local control. If we had the local control and we had those taxes in Ellsworth, we could put those taxes to work in setting the standards and programs that we felt were important to raise education levels in Ellsworth. That's the quality of education. What I want to take you to is 3 reports. One reported in October 18th, 2012, in which the Ellsworth American says...
interrupt you also. Is that a question? You have a question? Or is this a comment?
Did I interrupt you?
Sure. I'm trying to...
No, you're fine.
There's not been a soul interrupt you, and when we try to ask a question and we set a basis, you interrupt.
Not fair. Not fair.
This
is
the question period regarding the
Okay.
presentation that we made.
Okay, so if we have the local control and we can put it to the education, we feel we can do a good job and we would have the dollars to do it. The education that you folks have said you're working on, and I don't disagree that it isn't going to the other communities, but not Ellsworth. I'm trying to find out why. Ellsworth has failed in 3 different reports that I can show you.
All right, well, let's backtrack a little bit. Mark, your first question was about where the money went. And we've actually shown you a few graphs in the past, but we'll go through them right now. Those of you who had a chance to pick up handouts in the back, if you look up at the screen, you have a handout similar to that in your packet. And if you look at this, this actually gives you a lot of information about what's been happening to Ellsworth tax-wise under the present state funding formula. So we have the state valuation from 2008, 2009, and then you see that for each year up through this present year. Next to that, we have the EPS required local, and next to that, EPS state funding. So the first of those 2 columns is what you must raise, not by RSU standards, but by state standards, in order to get state aid for education. And this middle column here, this EPS state funding, I'll try to use a pointer, but it's not very large. This EPS state funding piece is how much money they gave you for raising that amount of money. So, back in 2008-09, if you have this chart in front of you, if you don't, maybe there's some copies, you can pick one up on your way out. The EPS local required back in 8-9 was $6,148,000, quite a bit of money. But for that $6,100,000, you were given more than half of that, $3,400,000 in state funds. Each year, if you've got the chart there, you can see that the state has required the town of Ellsworth, or the city of Ellsworth, to raise that amount of money by a considerable amount. Now, in the end, the state has a certain amount that they expect Ellsworth to pay towards a basic education. But the shift has been on to have more and more of that money come out of your pockets and less out of the state coffers. So, as you follow this down, again, my pointer here is a little difficult to follow, you can see that the first year you had to raise 6.1 and you got 3.4. The next year we had some ARA money, and so state funding was a little bit more generous. You had to raise 6.4, however, so you had to raise 300,000 more. When you get to the third year, it was 7.1. The fourth year, 7.8 million, and last year 8.3 million, and this year a whopping 8.5 million, almost $8.6 million. Now, discouragingly, back when you were raising 6.1 million, they were giving you 3.4 million. Now, you're raising 8.5 million and they're only giving you 2.4. So yes, you're absolutely right. Ellsworth people have been paying a whole lot more of local money towards education. But that would have happened whether you were part of RSU 24 or not, whether you were Ellsworth School District, whether you were part of a union, whether you were part of an AOS. Because the state formula for this, and I'll try to get a picture of that up in just a sec here. The state formula for this, here is a different picture that some of you have available. This is the breakdown. The state formula says that Ellsworth has to raise a certain amount of money for education. And back in 08-09, they took your total state valuation of your city, and they had you raise 6.55 mils on that valuation. And once you raised 6.55 mils, they gave you the rest of that. In this year, you had to raise 8.11 mils, and then they actually backtracked and gave you a little money back, but it was 8.811 in the spring. And for 8.11, they gave you a whole lot less money. But that 8.11 was not only a change from 6.55 mils to 8.11 mils. That 8.11 was on a whole lot more money. Because the state valuation in the city of Ellsworth over